snacks to spike your blood sugar that way. So with that, I will turn the time over to our first panel, and really grateful to be here with you all.
Good morning. My name is Samah Norquist. I am a fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. I also serve on the board of advisor of the Religious Freedom Initiative. I'm very grateful that we are the first panel and kickoff event for this incredibly important summit. And I'm very grateful for Dean Cole and Stephanie Barclay's leadership on this issue, particularly when it comes to international religious freedom. Religious freedom is on the retreat across the globe. Religious violence has risen to historic levels over the past decade, affecting nearly all religious groups. Believers of nearly all faiths, including Christians, Muslims, and Jews, Buddhists, Yazidis, and Baha'is, have faced discrimination, harassment, repression, and of course, persecution by state and non-state actors, as well as ideological movements. Religious freedom is America's first freedom. America's story started with communities of faith who escaped religious persecution. Religious liberty is grounded in our founding documents and Constitution. This morning, we kick off this important summit with this panel, The Protection of Religious Minorities. I am delighted that we have three incredible speakers that will each bring us to a different part of the region of the world. But the threats that they will talk about are all the same, threats to religious liberty. As Dean Cole just mentioned in his remarks, people of faith are the first to be victims of repressive government practices. With that, I will start with our first speaker. Professor Rodrigo Alves is a professor of constitutional law and international human rights law at the Federal University of Uberlândia in Brazil. He is a leading researcher of the Brazilian Center for Studies in Law and Religion. His research interests include international human rights law, law and religion, and constitutional law. He is a member of the steering committee of the Latin American Consortium for Religious Freedom, and he has recently edited the book Latin American Perspectives on Law and Religion. Professor Alves, the floor is yours. 12 minutes and I'll cut you off.
Okay. Thank you, Sama, for the introduction. And I would like to start by thanking Dean Marcus Cole and Stephanie Barclay, Rick Garnett, Nicole Garnett, and Francesca Matoso for this invitation to join this important conference here in the beautiful city of Rome. And as was said in the introduction, I come from Brazil. And however, before talking a little bit about our experience with protecting religious minorities in my country and maybe in my region, I would like just to share some thoughts about the situation of religious minorities and the human rights protections regarding religious minority groups. The situation of religious minorities is precarious in many parts of the world. In one of the reports of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, which analyzed human rights violations against persons belonging to religious minorities, he found that violations include disproportionate bureaucratic restrictions, denial of appropriate legal status positions needed to build up or uphold a religious infrastructure, systematic discrimination and partial exclusion from important sectors of society, discriminatory rules within family laws, indoctrination, acts of vandalism and desecration, among many other acts of violation against these groups because only of their religious identity. Religious minorities are being excluded and marginalized from mainstream of society just because of this characteristic, their religion or belief. Even in democratic societies where religious freedom and minority rights are protected by constitutional and legal rights, members of religious minorities have faced discrimination and exclusion from important sectors of society. Hostilities between communities certainly threaten social harmony, security, and peace, causing great damage to the whole society. Several aggravating factors contributed to the advance of tensions and polarizations affecting negatively minority religions, especially demographical shifts, migration, and misuse of communication technologies. Religious groups can be majorities and minorities in different parts of the world, sometimes in different regions in the same country. It is in the best interest of all religious groups the protection of religious minorities. However, a conception of tolerance which strategically aims at mutual coexistence only does not seem to be ideal. It is preferable that religious groups respect each other because they recognize each other as moral political equals and as persons entitled to the protection of human dignity, as citizens with human rights and duties within the political society, what Heiner Force would call the respect conception of tolerance. In relation to the protection of religious minorities, we could mention some international human rights standards and frameworks that are related to this type of groups. So we could mention at least two frameworks or legal frameworks that are related to the protection of religious minorities. The first one, and historically they have not been treated together by the international human rights law. However, we have some overlapping protections that could be taken into account in promoting the rights of religious groups. So the first framework is based on Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which protects the right to religious freedom, to manifest, to hold, to change one's freedom, one's religion or belief. And there are several instruments or documents that were built from the interpretation of Article 18. The first one, the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination based on Religion or Belief. This declaration was adopted in 1981 by the General Assembly of the United Nations and gave us a list of several protections or standards related to freedom of religion or belief that could be very helpful for promoting the rights of religious minorities. Together with General Comment 22 and Resolution 1618 on combating intolerance and negative stereotyping, these three basic instruments and the more recent additions to this framework, the Rabat Plan of Action and the Faith for Rights Toolkit. So this is just a short list of instruments that are helpful for promotion and protection of religious minorities. And second framework, based on Article 27 of the ICCPR, the same covenant, protects specifically religious minorities. And two documents are relevant. The Declaration of 1992 on the protection of minorities in general, and the recommendations of the Forum on Minority Issues of 2013. So I am mentioning this documents especially to say that they have been used as the basis for what we've been doing in Brazil in relation to the promotion and protection of the rights of religious minorities. One of the examples that I could give that I see as a best practice and I am actively engaged with is the work of the National Council of Justice in Brazil. In January this year, the National Council of Justice, which is the highest body of administration of justice in Brazil, adopted a resolution aiming to equip its judges, or the Brazilian judges, in relation to freedom of religion or belief, combating intolerance and discrimination against religious groups, especially religious minorities. And as one of the strategies based on this resolution, which is related to some of these standards and protections from this international human rights documents, a working group was created to plan and implement strategies related to capacity building of thousands of judges in Brazil and court staff and other people related to the Brazilian justice system, and to actively train judges on these topics. So we have been working together with the schools of judges in Brazil, aiming to equip them to be aware of the situation of minorities, to learn about how to accommodate the different issues and claims related to minority groups in our country. And this seems to be a very powerful strategy that can impact truly the situation of minorities, especially because judges are very important players in the promotion and protection of rights, especially of minority groups. So one of the strategies that we've been using in this capacity building initiatives is the Faith for Rights framework. And we aim to promote peer-to-peer learning among judges, prosecutors, and other actors of our justice system. And we have just started that, but it seems that we have already accomplished very good results. And we expect to have other experiences and examples to mention in the future about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Alves. Our next speaker is Farah Isfahani. She has been a leading voice for women and religious minorities in Pakistan for the past 25 years. First as a journalist, then as a member of Pakistan's National Assembly, and most recently as a scholar based in the United States. She is a senior fellow for South and Southeast Asia at the Religious Freedom Institute. She is a founding member of the Women's Freedom of Religion or Belief Alliance, and a steering group member at the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. She has authored 2 books on religious minorities. The first one is Purifying the Land of the Pure, History of Pakistan's Religious Minorities, and Politics of Hate, Regional Majoritism in South Asia. And that is a book that will be published in the fall, so make sure you get it. Ms. Isfahani.
No. Thank you so much, Sama. Thank you to the Notre Dame Religious Liberties Summit. Thank you to Dean Cole. Thank you to Francesca, who's been life-saving throughout. It's such an honor for me to see before me Dr. Cornel West, to see the president of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and to see Ambassador Suje and so many others who've made major contributions to religious freedom all over the world. Thank you, and thank you for being here today. And Brian Grimm, my friend. I see the issue for the need of protection for religious minority communities around the globe increasing day by day, and solutions harder to find with the rise of autocracies and attacks on democracies in many places. Religious freedom issues have worsened throughout the Middle East, China, and North Korea for some time, but now violence against religious minorities is a recurrent phenomenon in parts of Africa, like Nigeria. Even in Europe and the United States, there is a rise of intolerance towards religious minorities. One of the ways you can see it is the rise in attacks of anti-Semitism, the rise in attacks on Muslims, and a rise, there have been gun attacks on Christian churches as well. So that is troubling. Every year, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, and I'm so lucky to be sitting next to the chair, publishes a report on the state of religious freedom around the world. The report published this year identifies 15 countries as countries of particular concern. Another 12 countries were put on a special watch list, but that was not all. The report also cited incidents of violations of religious freedom in many other countries. The important thing for all of us gathered here, no matter what our faith background, the victims of lack of religious freedom do not belong to one faith. Sadly, the faith tradition whose followers in one country are the violators of the rights of the minority from another religion ends up being the victim of discrimination and persecution in another majority. That's why my new book is about majoritarianism and the link between religious freedom and the majority and politics in South Asia, in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Last year alone, 130,000 Muslims remained in government-run internment camps in Burma. 1 to 3 million Turkic Muslims were in Chinese concentration camps, and 880,000 Uyghur and other Turkic Muslim children were separated from their parents, but I will allow the expert and my honored panelist, Mr. Nuri Turkel, to talk in detail about China and the Uyghurs. Vietnam designated 85 religious groups as strange, evil, or heretical religions. This includes some Christian denominations. Nearly 6,000 religious organizations, including Christian churches, were adversely affected by the financial regulations in India, including losing licenses to receive funds from overseas members, organizations, or churches. Nearly 5 years after the defeat of ISIS in Iraq, almost 1 million Sunni Muslim Arabs, over 200,000 Yazidis, and tens of thousands of Christians remain in IDP and refugee camps there. So, to go on now, I'm going to focus a little bit on my area and then some solutions or perhaps ways of working past this terrible point we are at today. I was born in Pakistan and I served in its parliament. We have seen a significant deterioration in religious freedom conditions across South Asia in recent years. Blasphemy cases, forced conversions, attacks on houses of worship, hate speech, and violence targeting religious minorities are among the long list of religious freedom concerns in the region that spreads from Afghanistan to Bangladesh. South Asia, which is home to almost 2 billion people, representing every major and minor religious belief, has witnessed a surge in religious extremism, often supported by politicians and the state apparatus. Beginning with Pakistan's Islamization following the partition in 1947, especially over the last 2 decades, South Asia has seen the rise of Buddhist supremacism in Sri Lanka, growing Hindu supremacist sentiment in India, and increasing attacks on minorities in Bangladesh. Majoritarianism often results in attacks on places of worship of minorities and on minority individuals and communities. Laws are sometimes made to make life difficult for religious minorities. Freedom to convert has been limited in Pakistan for a long time. Now, India is also restricting the right to convert and the right to marry a person of another religion, something that affects Christians and Muslims. Over the years, politicians across the world have exploited ethnic and religious sentiments against minorities to mobilize support from the majority. So this majoritarian communalism entails rehashing historical grievances, creating fear among the majority, and that minorities threaten the majority's religion, culture, or tradition. So it is a mistake on the part of world leaders to ignore violations of freedom of religion or belief. Religious fires can create wars and threaten the national security of otherwise powerful and stable countries, including the US and those in Europe. The attacks of 9/11 are not that old, nor is the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan and ISIS in Iraq. In America in particular, we have the problem of having short memories and not remembering history. And I think that's a fundamental problem. We have to look at the totality to understand where we are now and what we have to fight. So to me today, one of the paramount, but the most important, I would say, issues that I see in the US today with religious freedom advocates is creating local and global partnerships internationally between religious and those people who are secular human rights advocates. The problem today is there is no united voice. The secular human rights advocates who will support a person's right in everything, but you bring up the word religion and they run from it. The discomfort you and I were talking about, Summer, is so there's a need to bring the left and right, the religious and the secular together in this, whether you call it religious freedom or whether you call it a human rights issue. But there's a broad need, and especially in the West, for those groups to come together to find a way to make a difference in the rest of the world. As Dean Cole referred to this, in Dignitatis Humanae, Pope Paul VI described religious freedom in 2 famous propositions. In matters of faith, let no one be compelled. Let no one be prevented. This is similar to the Quranic verse, chapter 2, verse 256, there is no compulsion in religion. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has also codified the principle of religious freedom in Article 18. So, yet, whether it's the UN Declaration or the Pope or the Holy Quran, the practice in the world today is far from what our leaders and our holy books have talked about as way forward. Nuri is here today as the authority on China, and I'm sure we will hear from others about various countries that are the most egregious violators of religious freedom. Let me just share some of the ways in which religious freedom is violated in the region that I research most, South Asia. Pakistan has entrenched discrimination against its minorities in its constitution and various laws. Discrimination against its minorities in its discrimination is supported by a powerful segment within Pakistani society. There's systematic enforcement of blasphemy, anti-Ahmadiyya laws. The authorities ignore forced conversion of religious minorities, include Hindus, Christians, and Sikhs to Islam. All this severely restricts freedom of religion and belief. I have been told to come to an end. So in my answers, perhaps, to your question, I will talk about possible ways forward. Thank you so much, Sama.
Thank you, Farah. Our last speaker is Nori Turkal, who is an attorney, foreign policy expert, and human rights advocate. Mr. Turkal is serves as the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom after being appointed as a commissioner by Speaker Nancy Pelosi in May 2020. He was born in a re-education camp at the height of China's tumultuous cultural revolution and spent the first several months of his life in detention with his mother. He has testified before U.S. Congress, speaking about Uyghur internment camps and advocating for a legislative response to China's atrocities. He is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C., and a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is the author of his new book, No Escape, The True Story of China's Genocide of the Uyghurs. Commissioner Turkal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for being here. I want to begin by thanking Religious Liberty Initiative staff, particularly Francisca, who has been very, very helpful arranging, accommodating all of my requests, and particularly in the last couple of days. And also cannot miss up this opportunity to thank Dean Cole, Professor Barclay, for organizing the book launch in London earlier this month. I'm profoundly grateful for their ongoing support of my work and shining the spotlight on the ongoing genocide in China. As noted, my official responsibility at the USERF includes covering religious persecution in China, Central Asia, and Middle East. We recently published our annual report as part of our mandate in the National Religious Freedom Act of 1998. And there are some key findings that are concerning, particularly in China. In 2021, religious freedom condition in China deteriorated. The government continued to rigorously implement its sinicization of religion and demanding that religious groups, as Dean Cole mentioned, should worship the CCP and Xi Jinping instead of their own God. There's a huge shift in the Chinese government's approach to religious groups. Even though there are 5 officially recognized religious practitioners, believers in China, including the Uyghur Muslims and Catholics, they have been particularly become a prime target because to the Chinese government, those 2 religions is considered foreign religion. Foreign religion is a Western influence from Xi Jinping, from Deng Xiaoping all the way to Xi Jinping. In the last 40, 50 years, China has been very, very clear. It essentially says in major speeches, we don't have to look into leaked documents or news reports or congressional testimony, just reading the official line, it says we're on a constant battle against the Western influence. Western influence include freedom of press, speech, and religion. So they figured out what they will do with respect to religious groups, even though their constitution supposedly permit and protect religious practices. So as noted by my co-panelists, that there's an ongoing genocide. This was also part of our report. There are anywhere between 1 to 3 million Uyghurs have been sent to concentration camps since late 2016. The United States and 8 other parliaments around the world have recognized this as a genocide. So our report also included 880,000 Muslim children have been separated from their parents. And also the government in the business of destroying, desecrating important religious sites. This is part of our finding. And also, we have been disturbed by the Chinese government's attack on Catholic community in Hong Kong and mainland China. As you know, that Cardinal Zen had been detained along with Jimmy Lai last year. And in the mainland China, the Chinese authorities have intensified its crackdown of Catholic and Christian community, harassing them, detaining, arresting, physically abusing the leaders. And also they have been removing the cross from the top of the church. They have been routinely raiding churches, detaining Christian leaders, and confiscating religious materials. So we, as part of a legislative mandate, we recommended the United States government to continue to designate China as CPC, country of particular concern, for engaging in systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom as defined in the statute. We also recommended that the United States government expand its financial and visa sanctions targeting Chinese officials responsible for carrying out severe religious freedom violations, especially within the CCP leadership, public security, and state security apparatus. Both Trump and Biden administration have imposed a significant number of sanctions against the Chinese entities and individuals, and we want this to be expanded to their network. I was also sanctioned by the Chinese government last December for the policy advocacy that I have been part of, and in retaliation to the United States government's decision to call for a diplomatic boycott and signing on the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Recently, I also found out that I was sanctioned by Russia as well. So 2 of the world's worst human rights abusers find my work to be troubling. We also recommended the United States government to work with like-minded governments to create a UN Commission on Inquiry to investigate and identify those individuals violating religious freedom in China. And also, as you all know, there are a lot of lawyers in this room. We have a number of legislative mandates, including the ones been enacted since 2021. And we want the U.S. government to aggressively and fully enforce those laws. So why we have this troubling trend in China? When you look at as I noted earlier, the Chinese leadership has made up their mind long time ago. To the Chinese leadership, the religious practices in general poses a threat, not only to the leaderships to continue to group in power, but also the survival of the Communist Party. History, civic engagements, activists, and most relevant to religion have capacity to energize large masses of people in pursuit of goals to counter CCP's party and legitimacy. This is the key aspect of CCP's view of any religious practices in China. And the Chinese leadership have developed a succinct strategy towards any potential institution that could distract or detract from his own singular authority, that is to co-opt what could be useful to threaten that leader's power struggle, and as a result, they are willing to destroy anything at any cost under any justification.